Let's get into it, boys. More significant affix changes coming. These are the full transcribed answers from the questions, edited for clarity. Here we go. Affixes have continued to be a controversial topic. At this point, it seems the closer we get to an affix that does nothing, the happier people are. Facts. Do you still think that affixes are needed to change week-to-week combat? If so, what changes would you feel like affixes need to make in order to become more fun for players? Yep, great question. Let's go. Good job, Mr. Wowhead. Ian Hazzikostas said, this has obviously been a huge topic in the community in recent weeks. It has been a huge topic from the team in recent weeks. We're far from done when it comes from the current state of beta. We're looking to roll out a couple more pretty significant swings in how we approach affixes in the Mythic Plus system. Okay, so just right off the bat, I'm so confused because I was at both Q&As in Alpha, and both times... Alright, sorry, I was not at both Q&As. I lied about that. I was at one of them. The other one was at 9 in the morning. There's no fucking way I would have been up for that. But someone recorded it and I listened to it. And they asked this question both times. And both times they were like, we're not looking to make any more significant changes to affixes than we made in Season 4. So I wonder, maybe that person didn't know or was not well learned on that subject and just said that? Which that person normally seems like they know what they're talking about. So that was the Bybee. Bybee said that, and Bybee knows everything. So maybe they just heard the response to that and then started working on it. I guess it doesn't really matter, but it's just two totally different answers from them. As testing continues in the upcoming weeks, I don't want to get ahead of spoiling what all those will be, but stay tuned for some more forum and blog posts in the next couple of beta builds. Okay, part of what we've been... Why did they put beta in brackets? Did Wowhead do that? Next couple of beta. Like, it's like crazy emphasized. Okay, part of what we've been talking about is the increasing divergence, kind of shitty movie, in the approach that the Mythic Plus audience takes to the content. Actually, the first Divergent movie wasn't that bad, but the third one is impressively bad of that series. Okay. And Mythic Plus audience takes the content. We look at affixes like bolstering and raging, and for the average Mythic Plus player, to the extent that there is such a thing, is the person who is just running Mythic Plus for loot, for filling out their vault row, and just to have fun running the dungeons with friends. If you're running a Mythic 8 or whatever, we're seeing consistent participation and success rates week over week. For that audience, affixes continue to serve a valuable purpose in varying that experience week over week, slightly changing the puzzle that the group needs to solve. We've heard feedback from the community that asks if it's just there to add difficulty, why are they needed? We have health and damage increases to add difficulty, and we agree the primary purpose of affixes is not to add difficulty, is to add variety. Well, okay, there's a lot to unpack here. So, number one, they are right in this, and this is the thing that is constantly missed. When you hear opinions from people about Mythic Plus, what do those people normally do? Like when you're reading an opinion on Twitter, if you're hearing an opinion on Twitch, like, just think about it right now. When you've heard people make arguments about what needs to change with Mythic Plus, what is one thing that is consistent with those people? Well, they want it to be easy. Okay, no, I'm probably leading you in the wrong direction here by not asking this the right way. They all do high keys. None of those people are running Mythic 8s with their buddies because they like running dungeons. They're completely removed from that line of thinking with Mythic Plus. Why that's important is, if you're Blizzard and you're making the game for the majority of people, the vast, overwhelming vast majority of players do keys that stop well before a lot of the problem points people complain about. Now, I am not excusing affixes in any way. You guys know how I feel about affixes, but I think it's important when Blizzard says something like this, they're like, well, we see people who are running 8s, like, it seems the participation metrics are the same, we can see that, and we think that people really enjoy it being different. And they're not meant to add difficulty, they're meant to be different. Now, I know you guys can already hear someone you've heard stream about to about this because they're like, why the fuck do those people matter? But those are the overwhelming, vast 90+% majority of people that do Mythic Plus at all. I would say probably 99, 98% is like will stop at the point where it gives the best loot / it gives the like seasonal portals and stuff, which I think is a 10 now, right? They'll never go higher than that. But the people you hear talking about affixes affecting them negatively are almost always people that are doing higher than that. I'm one of those people. When I do keys, I'm not going to have fun in an 8. I'm even saying this against myself. Like, I oftentimes am thinking about how this would affect me or someone that I would play with, and it often doesn't affect the majority of people. So whenever you're thinking about the way Blizzard is going to change something, it is important to add context to like try to take yourself out of the way you play the game for the second and try to just imagine who the most people are. And then you're like, okay, this is a problem. Okay, does that affect 20s? or old 20s. Fuck, God, I still am not used to the new key levels. I probably will fix that in the expansion when I actually play the game again. But like, if you know, like, okay, does this apply to a 10? Is it a problem at a 10? Yeah, I mean, I still think affixes are a problem in 10s. I still think people who do 10s and 8s vastly prefer to have their dungeon feel different with volcanic than they do with than they do with bolstering, right? Like I mean, there's some dungeons that are worse than others, but it's not as bad of a problem. Because, like, when a lot of people think of the issues with this, it's like, oh, you can't push a key this high. Oh, well, now keys are locked. You can't go higher. But, like, again, 99% of Mythic Plusers are never like, I can't complete this key because it is bolstering this week, right? So that's why. The reason why they like bolstering so much, even though it's really shitty at a high level, is because it changes your gameplay more than anything else. You have to kill things evenly. That decision alone is probably why they like bolstering. Let's continue. Now for people who are playing Mythic Plus at the highest end of the system, people who have long since gotten Keystone Hero and all their teleports and are pushing potentially for the season titles or to improve their personal best, the only thing they're playing for in the system is raising that bar, is raising that personal best. And so at the cutting edge of the limits of any system, when you have a variation from week to week, there will be some outcomes that are more favorable than others. For groups that are pushing their limits, if they realize that they're able to achieve a new best on a push week, like bursting or whatever, and the next week cycles in, and even though they could complete dungeons, they know they could not beat their absolute best time, it makes the whole week feel dead, and it feels dead because of that affix. And who is responsible for that affix? Blizzard, the World of Warcraft team. He's cooking, by the way, right here. I don't know if he's going to pull it all together at the end, but right now he is fucking... What's that meme that Frank always posts where he has the big pot and he's like fucking cooking a bunch of shit? He's exactly right so far. Let's keep it moving. So basically, if you're a high key person, maybe you could have felt it the past that they just don't understand you. I feel like Ian Hazzikostas in one paragraph here, half of a paragraph, has told you he understands exactly why affixes feel bad for specifically that very, very small section of people. Also, quick shout out here, just in case Dorky's listening to this. Oh yeah, he's posting in chat. Dorky, you're doing time trials right now, by the way. Get out of here, buddy. Stay small. Go time some keys. They very rightly give the feedback that this is frustrating. This is getting in their way of enjoying the experience. We understand that, and we agree. I don't think the right answer is to remove affixes for all players. However, we are discussing some solutions that may allow players who are focused on the competitive optimization and perfection aspect of the dungeon system to have less random... Oh, fuck. That's going to be sick. On the competitive optimization and perfection aspect of the dungeon system to have less randomness and variation in their week-over-week experience. This is something that we've seen across dungeons and other forms in the past. Going back to past expansions, dungeons like Archway or Wakeress Manor used to have different routes from week to week or even from run to run to vary the experience, so it feels like players running the dungeon are exploring a dynamic environment. But we understand that if you are in an esports setting or absolutely trying to squeeze every ounce of performance out of your group, variation is unwelcome. So those are some of our broad philosophical thoughts right now. We look forward to sharing the plans of working with the community. Okay, so this is an excellent answer. Ian Hazzikostas absolutely fucking nailed this. Not only did he point out that he understands exactly the point of view of a high key player, he is saying, hey, we understand that. Also, people have kind of been asking for this. People have been asking for, like, hey, maybe at a certain key level, things stop scaling, or maybe at a certain key level, it's more about speed rather than just, like, making sure you can stay alive at that point. And also, this is one thing I've been thinking about recently. I wonder if there's a way to make this interesting with Mythic Plus. Like, in Raid, everything is, like, time-gated, but not in, like, the traditional way of time-gating. What I mean by that is, like, for Mythic Plus, or for Raid, it's like you get Hall of Fame. Your goal is to get Hall of Fame, to be the first to do something. The race to world first is the race to world first, right? But in dungeons, there's nothing to grind for and go for immediately, because kind of every dungeon you time before you're fully geared is just irrelevant, right? Like, it just matters what score you can get at the end of the expansion, like 5 months later, which is who the fuck plays an entire 5-month WoW season, you know, like a very small amount of people already. So it's like there should be some like kind of I don't know what kind of a cook I'm doing right now, but I just wish there was some kind of thing you could do in Mythic Plus to be the first to do this thing, or the first X amount of people to do this thing, and have that be cool and something people go for. I just wish there was something like that in Mythic Plus, other than just, hey, Mythic Plus is hype and cool and all, and I'll see you in 5 months to see how well you do. You know, that's just weird. But I guess like PvP is kind of similar. Right. Okay, let's continue. Maybe since plus 10s are natural, max could be have the first 20s be an achievement. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be fucking sick, kind of. I don't know. Would be nice to have something between Keystone Hero and 0.1% as well, like Glad and PvP. Yeah. Let's see. So with the recent affix changes, the community has reacted to seeing bolstering and sanguine still in the rotation. These affixes seem to go against the mantra of minimizing the mechanical overlap between affixes and dungeon trash design. What was the thought process for keeping these 7+ affixes, and can we expect more changes to these affixes to make them more fun in the line and slated to be replaced by the future? Well, I mean, he kind of already answered this question, right? Like, I remember people were saying, like, why don't you just remove bolstering and sanguine and bring back entangling and volcanic, like 2 things that don't matter? And it's because they feel like entangling and volcanic don't vary up your gameplay as much as these. And they're exactly right. Like, entangling and volcanic don't change any decision you're making. They're just kind of like there and they exist, which is why they removed them. Bolstering and sanguine, while being more annoying and people don't really like them, they do make you go at the pack differently. If a pack is bolstering and you know it's bolstering, you will change the way you play that pack otherwise. Same thing with sanguine as they're dying, right? Now, at a higher level, as they mentioned, that's a problem. But at a lower level, it's just it is varying the dungeons enough. They don't want them to feel same week to week where those other ones do. Now, you don't even need me to go into like how that affects the higher community differently, but makes sense. Let's see what he says. So we're making a shit cake and not a cake. Yeah, basically. Yeah. Morgan Day said, the changes we're discussing certainly right now are pretty big swings. We're looking at this from the point of Mythic Plus is really trying to serve multiple audiences and trying to come up with a one-size-fits-all solution. To that has caused some problems in finding the correct solution. 100% true. The goals for people, the goals for 99% of the people are totally different than 1% of people, and the 1% of people want something totally different, so why not make something for them? But then the argument against that is, I mean, people say this all the time with Raid, right? Don't design the game for the 1%, so any time spent designing the game for 1% of people is a waste of time. I still think there's a lot of people who would potentially enjoy going higher than 10 right now, which is where you stop getting all the portals and stuff. There's just no reason to. Like, if you look in-game, like, you're basically, it's like a chicken before the egg thing, right? Like, who's going above 10 right now? If they actually designed for it, there would be more people doing that in the future, right? Like, after you get, like, you get this tier piece, and then you get Keystone Master, and then you get Keystone Hero, and then you get all these portals, and then the only reason you would ever do a higher dungeon than a 10 is to just get the title 5 months from now? Or is that it? Is that the only reason to do that, other than like pushing yourself or just doing dungeons for fun, right? That's like the only reason. Like, if they actually added a reward path in there, not even necessarily with gear, I think you would find more people doing that. So I think this could benefit everyone. This could, by leaving the Mythic Plus system as it is for 99% of players, I think if they added something above that was actually designed well and wasn't a one-size-fit-all solution, I think it would also have more people be doing more challenging keys, which would be just good for everybody, right? To impress girls as well. Yeah, girls love that. Let's see. To speak to the post that we made, I think one of the major design goals there that we could try to reiterate more on is that we're not trying to create new nameplates in the gameplay space. Okay, I don't think he means nameplates literally. We're not trying to create things that might be considered an ability or mechanic on a boss fight. You're not spawning a new ad. There's not Quaking or Volcanic where feel like these mechanics are just kind of just happening. The things that we wanted to focus on were things that felt like a overarching rule change. Like, all the trash of the dungeon behaves this way or reacts in this way, and you can plan for that really easily. It's not something that would surprise you. You can hopefully approach the pulls differently or approach the dungeon differently to combat those affixes. That was really where we were focusing on when we did keep some of those affixes that were in those current level 7 bucket. Like we said, we're taking a big step back and revisiting all of that. Okay, so I got a little confused through this paragraph, but he's basically just reiterating what we were just talking about. When you're talking about keeping those affixes in particular, the only reason, like, you're thinking of, like, why not keep entangling and volcanic rather than bolstering and sanguine? You're like, because entangling and volcanic are both easy, and easy means good, and bolstering and sanguine are more impactful, and more impactful is annoying and bad in the key levels that I'm doing. But they're just reiterating exactly what I speculated before, which was just that those things at least are something you can plan for. You know they're happening. They're not random. And, like, it changes the way you do in a dungeon. And that is our goal. But they are stating that's our goal for people who are doing 10s. We understand that affects people doing higher than 10s for score, which Ian talked about up here, completely differently. And we are looking to basically completely... Like, if you're a high key player, I think this is awesome. What you're hearing from this so far, you're basically they're all but saying and maybe I'm reading too much into this. It sounds like they're planning on making a High Mythic Plus mode. Like they're going to design High Mythic Plus for High Mythic Plus players, because right now what they're doing is they're designing keys for people doing plus 10s, and just people doing high keys have always just existed with that, and it's just been kind of a mess, and those two people care about two different things. And now they're going to actually look at why you'd want to do High Mythic Plus. And I don't think that's just they're designing the game for the 1% or whatever. I think it actually makes sense. People clearly enjoy doing this. I do it for fun. I don't give a fuck about title. There was one season where I played for 2 months because I was having fun the entire time, and I could have logged in at the end of the season and got 50 more score and got title, and I wasn't having fun then, so I didn't do it. The only 2 months I played had nothing to do with title or gear or anything. It was just to have fun, right? It's like doing keys is a really good way to have fun for a while if you like the class you're playing. I feel like more people would be interested in that if there's actually a reason to. And I think if they recooked the thing, like High Mythic Plus should be more fun than it is, right? The fact that it is, kind of like a grind fest with homework keys and all these things that are just, and depletion and all that shit is just products of this being this mode created for, basically this mode was never created with anything above a 10 in mind, an old 20, a new 10. So they're saying that we're considering basically making a version of Mythic Plus or changing the rules basically for people who are doing high keys. If you're a high key player, that is like the best possible thing you could hear, right? Very good. Obviously, unless they make it, unless they try to make something for those players and ends up being worse than what the current thing is, but at least they're clearly hearing response, right? What is this thing that he says right here? But like we said, we're taking a big step back and revisiting all of that with our next iteration. I think it is very obvious just by the fact that they took this interview to begin with, and that they're saying this, that they have heard your feedback that we don't like this, right? Very loudly. So interesting to see what it is, at least. And then Ian hazzikostas added to this answer. Again, looking at the data that is informing our decisions, there are meaningful differences in how people experience the content based on the level they're running it at. An affix like Storming, that was considered a free affix by very high-end players, had a noticeable impact on the success rates in lower ranges. Had a noticeable Oh, I see. So he's saying that, like, people consider Storming it's not like a free or affix. Storming's really, really fucking annoying for tanks specifically. And like minorly for melee. I think ranged at like turbo doesn't matter. What he means by considered a free affix is it means that is a week that has Storming on it is a week that you can time a higher key because one of those affixes is not preventing you from timing, right? Like Storming is annoying, but it's not slowing your dungeon down to where you're not going to complete it, right? What he's saying is we noticed that Storming was actually lowering participation rates, or maybe not participation, but success rates in lower ranges. So that's something we wanted to remove. But then there's no way that wouldn't also be true about bolstering and stuff like that. Something like bursting, that again is considered far easier than bolstering or raging in terms of pushing keys the higher end, has a heavier impact on key success rates than bolstering or raging at the lower end because the strategies that are being used are different. That sounds crazy to me. Well, there's two parts of it. Okay, let's break this down. So raging, I could see not being an issue at lower end, because why is raging a problem at higher end? Well, you need an AUG to mass dispel the enrages, and if you don't dispel the enrages, they get cast off and you die. At a lower key level, that's just not true. If casts go off at a lower key level, which they do all the time, you kind of just don't die. So raging is just way, way less important to begin with than higher levels. That I completely believe. That like raging doesn't affect success rates at the lower end of keys. I believe that. But bolstering, though, I feel like bolstering, well, Everbloom was like a specific, bolstering, just in how bolstering works, doesn't it just become multiplicatively harder the higher key level you go? So isn't bolstering always going to be a more dangerous affix the higher key you go? So I think this is kind of just true. I don't think it's the strategies are different, but but let's use that. Okay, so this sounds true, but they said bursting. It surprised me that bursting, because like, some strategies you do at higher end is you pull bigger than you do at lower end, but bursting at lower end, you're not pulling as many mobs, so it should be easier, but also you're not mass dispelling it, so maybe you're more likely to die. Maybe just healers are less reliable at a lower level, so that just makes something like bursting randomly a lot more difficult. Bursting, lower keys, roll bolstering. Oh, yeah. They don't know how to press stone form. They don't know how to press stone form defensives. Healers are not as good. They don't know how to, like, not roll it to the next stack. Okay. So you guys are saying you think what he's saying here is not cap. I initially read this and I'm like, there's no way that's true. But then I thought about it and I'm like, okay, he's right. Okay. And so I think for players at the high end, a lot of what is fun about the system, at least as we understand it, is pushing their limits and employing really aggressive strategies to try to fight as many things at the same time and move through the dungeon as quickly as they can. And affixes that maybe feel more punitive to the particular strategies that are the most effective at that level end up being the most frustrating ones. Another way to look at this entire long sentence here is pull big fun affix that makes you unable to pull big no like, which is true. But players who are playing at a different level, at a different meta, using different approaches. He said meta, I'm mad. And just like that, I'm mad. To the dungeons that are having a totally different experience. And so that's what a lot of what we're trying to navigate as we think through how to evolve Mythic Plus going forward. Great answer again. He's fucking owning. He's fucking... Ian only hits. What is it exactly? Ian is yapping heavily to try and justify stupid affixes. I think everything he said here was right. What Ian said here was right. I think this totally makes sense. Oh, yeah, Ion, like what Dorky calls him. In Dragonflight, oh, the stops question. Here we go. In Dragonflight, stops, disorients. Wait, the no affix crowd is just giga mad? Dude, the no affix crowd is just crying for help. That's what no affixes mean. They're crying for help because they just want to fix the version. They're trying to fix the version of the game that they've been playing. But Blizzard's saying there is no way to, like, fix this because you're just doing higher keys of something we've designed for everyone else that does these up to 10s. What they're saying is, let's not try to, like, make a one-size-fit-all solution. Let's give you people who like running higher dungeons something else. I feel like a lot of you guys who are really mad about this are missing that. That is, all of the problems you guys have with how high keys play are because you are using a system designed to get people their portals on a 10 and to fill out their vault, and you've spammed it high enough and run into all these problems of infinite scaling, and then you're like running into like, oh, just fix this and this and this, and Blizzard's saying like, hey, for the first time ever, we won't just try to fit all these things under one roof. We'll just give you something that is for you. I feel like that is just, how could you not want that answer? That's like, and it's also like easily the most logical way to look at this too. All right, anyways, the stop question is important. In Dragonflight, stops have been used to cancel almost all casts in Mythic Plus dungeons. This has put a significant imbalance on classes with and without AoE stops, and players who use and don't use them, with the damage intake between a group who uses stops and groups who don't is massive. How do you feel about this, and are there any changes for these in the War Within? This is also something we've been talking about a bunch. W. The role and importance of stops in Mythic Plus is something that has kind of grown organically over the last couple expansions. The ability to stop casts from completing is something that has always been part of WoW, but generally an enemy that was knocked back or whatever would instantly begin that cast again. You would have to use a kick or a counter spell to truly put it on cooldown. So those were more limited in value in the past. Or in Legion, when Mythic Plus first came out, you just played 5 Blood Elves and you did like Arcane Torrent, Stun, Arcane Torrent, Arcane Torrent, Arcane Torrent, and then it just all died and it was fine. The team has started designing specific abilities in dungeons to go on cooldown when the spell cast began, no matter what. So if you stopped that cast in any manner, it would go on cooldown just as if it had been interrupted. That is still appropriate in some circumstances, but the increasing proliferation in dungeons is what's kind of created this incredibly powerful utility that has been seen to dictate perceived optimal comps in the last couple years. So we've been designing War Within dungeons to move back closer to how things used to be in that regard, still doing it where it's appropriate, but not defaulting to having all abilities go on cooldown when the cast starts. These tools should be tremendously powerful tools for disrupting, more managing, or relocating enemies in a dungeon, but they shouldn't be the answer to nearly every problem that you're presented in a way that reduces viable comp diversity. Okay, so a couple problems with this. So again, maybe none of this will be a problem because they're still talking about it a bunch. And also, the people who really care about this are high Mythic Plus players, and it looks like you guys are getting your own shit anyway. So let's just understand those 2 points here before getting into this. But making there be more mechanics and having them not actually be stopped by a stop means you need more, right? If Mob is casting super dangerous spell that is going to kill you, and tail swiping it doesn't make it go on cooldown and it's going to keep spamming it, you're just going to have to keep stopping it and keep stunning it. It actually makes it so you need more stops, as far as dungeon design is concerned. So that could, I mean, obviously if they implemented it like this and they got this feedback, I haven't done, actually I think I've done almost all the Mythic Plus dungeons. It does seem like there's quite a few stops. Like, this is why Do you guys remember when they made that change in Ataldazar that people really hated because it scaled really insane on a high key level? But do you remember the last boss of Ataldazar used to have a cast and you would interrupt it and they were just kind of like an irrelevant mechanic? But then they made it unable to be interrupted and they made it happen. Now it scaled too hard and ended up just being something that one-shot you, so it ended up being something people didn't really like, mostly at a high level. It was not an issue on the level they designed these for. But if you think about that, that's kind of what they want to do in Mythic Plus, and I think in every trash pack, and I think there is some good in that. So, for example, let's say you could never stop anything in a Mythic Plus dungeon. They made kicks not work, they made stops not work. There's literally just every mob that was going to cast something was going to cast something. That would obviously take away from the game in some ways, but let's just say as an experiment. Then Blizzard would design the dungeon packs and the boss to do exactly as much things to you as seems reasonable within a trash pack. Just like the thing where, okay, well, you can just kick this on the boss. Well, if it happens and you have to deal with it, you're now designing the exact experience you want players to go through. So what you would learn from this is if you do this in like a current Dragonflight dungeon, you would just get clapped, right? Like if you didn't stop all the casts on any pack, you would just get fucking slaughtered. But like the packs are like that because all of these stops exist, right? So I think they're kind of onto something here. They probably need to keep talking about it, but something I feel like stops should matter. Like having leg sweep should be something that matters, you know, like a stun. But if these things are going to happen anyway and they're unable to be stopped, I just think it would maybe curate a better dungeon experience on how many things you actually want to have happen. Because what might happen is people try this one time and they're like, hey, now that we can't stop anything, there's too much going on. What's the response to that? Blizzard's going to remove the amount of things going on until there is a adequate, palpable level, or just an adequate level of things that are happening that people are okay with, right? And everyone says, like, you just don't want the mobs to do anything. That's not true. Like, sometimes doing big pulls where you're fighting a million mobs and you can use stops and make it work is true. But if every pack you ever fought literally just auto-attacked you, you guys would get fucking bored with that, right? So there's clearly a line where there's enough mechanics and not too little and not too much. I think we've been on the too much thing for a while, which is why stops are so relevant and why the stops that different classes have are very meta defining. Like warriors haven't been like in quotes meta, I don't think ever in Mythic Plus, by the way, like DPS warriors. I think stops is certainly a part of that. It was definitely an issue with that in this expansion. Yeah, I don't know. I'd like to see what they keep cooking there. Let's see what Morgan says. Let's see. It also just creates a disparity in how the game works and how Mythic Plus and Dungeons worked in some cases. Spells only have a cooldown when they're kicked or when they complete their cast. That's my expectation as a player. That's how my character works. As Ian mentioned, taking a step back and essentially reevaluating, not treating that as a different experience from how the rest of the game works, also provided an opportunity for look at this and evaluate other things. We don't want to just make this change in a vacuum. We wanted to look at, all right, these spells that are considered must stop. What's their cast time? What's their recast time? Let's make these changes and look at how dangerous these spells are with more intentionality, because it's very easy to just have them recasting or quick cast times when they're thrown around more commonly. Is this the end of the interview? They answered 3 questions. I mean, it was just like very straight to the point. They asked all the questions they needed to ask. But yeah, I mean, they're good questions. Yeah, they were really good questions. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the stop thing is weird. Like, think about it in a raid, right? Would it be possible for Blizzard to make a good raid boss if you could use stops to make raid bosses stop doing their mechanics? No? Okay, you're right. It would be awful. So to make like a good experience with the mechanics you do or don't deal with and the combination of them, you kind of need to look at them from a perspective of they cannot be stopped. So I don't know. I'm just interested in the design element of that. I would just maybe even just do it in one dungeon. Just make a dungeon where nothing can be stopped and try to find the level of mechanics that happens on a fight that you cannot stop and you will definitely deal with, and see what number of things are the people actually want to do, you know? And I think that would just be an interesting experiment. It would be interesting to see what people actually like. There's 20 people in a raid, a bit more possibility for stops in there. You understand what I meant though, right? Or do I have to go back and explain why I made that comparison? Like, okay, I guess I'm just gonna go. I probably explained it bad. Okay, so let's say you're in a raid, and not everyone can use stops to do raid mechanics because there's 20 people like you just suggested. Let's just say, I don't know, like 2 people in the raid can stop mechanics. Just the tanks. Let's say just the tanks have an ability to tail whip the boss or leg sweep the boss, and the boss doesn't do its mechanic. Wouldn't that fucking ruin they'll make raiding dog shit. They wouldn't know how to design raids because, like, how can we would have to add a million mechanics, so they have to choose which ones they want to remove. You know, stuff like that. Like, it's the point was you can more accurately craft a encounter, a PvE encounter, whether that's trash or a boss, that's interesting when you can remove the ability to make things not happen. So the whole thing with stops and Mythic Plus is fucked to begin with, because how do you make a certain, because stops exist, you have to add a million mechanics, which also just hurts the groups that are less coordinated too. So like, I think making more dungeon mechanics unstoppable and something you have to deal with in some way could lead to a better designed experience for Mythic Plus, because it would lower the importance of stops, which would help a little bit of the meta, although there could be more questions in here, like what about the defensives in the game? That's a great question for meta-defining things that are super specific. You'd be able to craft a better experience on what something should actually look like, right? If they made... Now, in all of your all's heads right now, you're like, okay, well then that just means dungeons are going to be a shit show with a bunch of mechanics, because you're assuming the dungeons that are created right now for stops would just get all their casts off. But the reality is you would never be able to actually design it like that, because that would be horrible. You would obviously remove a ton of things because you know some things will have to be dealt with, right? You'd have to create the dungeon with that in mind. And I think it would just create better content, just for the same reason that raid content is created to be much better than it would be if you could just randomly make mechanics not work, like when Shadow Meld used to work and like Smoke Bomb and stuff. What is it? If mechanics cap at a sensible level in terms of damage, that would diminish the requirement of all those tools in High Mythic Plus, making the abundance of defensives less impactful. Since pushing those high keys is all about damage, and then it becomes how little defensives you can take. Yeah. I mean, we've talked about that a lot. I think right now, this is huge information, by the way. This is like kind of groundbreaking. I mean, Blizzard for the first time ever is acknowledging and with perfect accuracy describing how it feels to be a high key player, and them basically spitting that they completely understand and they're right. And they're also saying, hey, we've never like really designed Mythic Plus to be done for that. It's just always existed since the beginning of Mythic Plus. Like, Mythic Plus is designed for the people that are doing it to get gear, and then eventually they added the portals, and they added like Keystone here or whatever, and they added a reward path, and clearly you can see when they intend you to stop doing Mythic Plus, because the reward path ends, right? What they said here was correct. And the really good news is they're saying the one-size-fits-all solution is not working. We think the experience of doing keys to get gear, doing keys to farm crests, doing keys to get portals is a different experience, and always has been, than farming High Mythic Plus. So they need to be designed separately, which, if you do High Mythic Plus, has to be the best thing you've ever heard, because it's never been designed for you. You've been doing something that hasn't been designed for you the whole time. 1 second, someone's at the door. Like, unless you're just like, if you're a high key player and you're just permanently jaded, like you have a really, really bad relationship, like an unhealthy relationship with you as a player of a game and then the developer of that game, which can happen like that. You guys see that happen all the time, right? It's unfortunate, but it does happen. I just don't understand how this could not be the best news ever. Like, if you are someone who's loved doing High Mythic Plus since BFA, since Legion, since Shadowlands, whatever, you're just like, I love doing High Mythic Plus. It is my identity. It is what I do. What you have done the whole time is something that was never designed for it. You've been trying to... Like, you guys know that meme on TikTok where that girl's watching the guy put like all the like circle and square and triangle shaped logs through like the corresponding hole in the bucket that it's supposed to go into, but then the guy keeps putting it into the square because they all fit into the square one, even though it's supposed to go... Yeah, exactly. That's right. The square hole. Exactly. That's what you've been doing in Mythic Plus the whole time. You've been putting all of the different shapes into the square hole just to make it work. You've been doing something that has not been designed for what you're doing. You've just been doing an extra thing, right? And now they're saying they're going to look at how High Mythic Plus works, and we're not going to give you the one-size-fits-all solution of trying to make changes for... And all the changes they make in Mythic Plus, let it be known, are just for people doing 10s, because that's 99% of people. And we're going to give you guys your own thing, or we're going to separate it in some way where we can tune both differently, because both play the game totally differently, and they're exactly right. I don't understand how anyone could be upset about that. If that is your identity, this is the best news you could possibly hear. Or maybe if you're so like fucking anti-Blizzard brained that you can't think of that for yourself, let me inform you that this is the best possible thing that you could get. Like, the likelihood that Blizzard gives you some... Actually, let's talk about what this is. I mean, haven't we talked about it a million times? Isn't it like the keys stop scaling at a certain point, or like at a certain point the affixes turn off? I mean, it sounded like... I mean, we're totally speculating, but like... Is it in a 15 all affixes go away and they change the scaling a little bit, or it becomes, what would the JB take be? It would be like at a 15 affixes are removed and it now scales up purely with time, or I don't know. I could also, I mean, there's definitely a world where they try to design it and then they end up making it worse, because it would need to still be difficult. Like, for example, if they were to stop it at a 15 and just make it time, I think people wouldn't like that, because 15s don't hit hard enough. Like, the most fun thing to tank in WoW is like a super high Mythic Plus dungeon, because like raids, you outgear them really fast and they don't scale, and tanking massive pull, like, you would just never feel what it's like to tank something really difficult ever again, right? I don't know where they'd have to stop it, but like, I think what they're going to target for high key players is maybe something along the lines of key depletion. I don't know. All I know is we're going to have a great podcast episode talking about this the entire time on Friday. Max JB said last season anything above a 25 shouldn't hit harder. The timer should just get shorter. Yeah, he said that a while ago, and then I told him that I'm going to steal that and tell people it was my take. So it's been my take now for a couple of seasons, just in case you were wondering. What is it? We need Asmongold to give his take, or I won't know what to think. I mean, I already know what the take's going to be, right? Like, I feel like the Asmongold take, whenever they announce whatever this is, regardless of the quality of it, is this is bad because they're designing the game for the 1%, right? That's got to be the... Because this will be one of the few times where that actually does make sense. I mean, they're literally doing that. That's exactly what this is. So if you're someone who likes saying stuff like that, you got to get your licks in when it actually makes sense. And surprise, surprise, it's a good thing to do. Well, I actually think it would make a lot more people... Because, like, if you think about it, them making something like this would just simply give you a reason to play above a 10. Like, it cannot be emphasized enough how there is nothing in-game that makes you want to do something over a 10 outside of just wanting to play the game. There's no reward path for it. And regardless of what you think, that like people are very reward path minded. There might be a content that you never do ever, but you do it because you want the reward, and then you end up liking it. Like, you need to get pushed in a direction, right? WoW players need this more than anything else, because the best way to play WoW for a long time is to play it seasonally and then play other games. Those are like the happiest people who play it for a few months every season and then just go play other games. And then like WoW players, the most unhappy WoW players are ones that want WoW, or really any game, to entertain them all year round. So it would be like WoW encouraging you to be like, hey, play another game. You may not like other games because you're a WoW player, but as soon as you try one, you're like, oh, this is great. Now you're instantly a happier person, right? So giving rewards, pushing you to try something would be nice. You guys do High Mythic Plus. You think High Mythic Plus is fun, right? Maybe for a different reason than unlocking the portals. It's more challenging. Mage Tower will show you that even casuals in WoW appreciate challenge. They just need to be led in that direction. So right now, yes, making a different version of whatever for high keys is designing the game for the 1%, but I also think it is going to potentially give everyone who does Mythic Plus up to 10s, which I think is a lot of people. It's an aspirational goal every season for a lot of people. It's going to give them a reason to keep doing it if the rewards are good, or if the content is really fun. Be interesting to cook what that is. But I feel like cooking what that is just going to be everyone repeating takes on what this should be for the last couple of years. Maybe later on in the interview they'll give us a hint, although it doesn't look like it. They only posted half of the interview, so, or maybe not even half. Max, that dog is running for its life in its dream. Oh, she is. Look at her little leggies. Look at her. Do you guys think she's just frolicking in a field? Just a happy little dog. Just being a little dog. Running from the cone. Yeah. Wouldn't removing infinite scaling and focusing more on time make this whole esport Mythic Plus much more thrilling to watch? Not necessarily. I mean, over time, they've made the MDI, which is the speed running Mythic Plus variant of the esport thing. They've made those keys higher. Like, if you were to watch people speed run 2s, where technically it would be not about infinite scaling, it would be about time, that would be like turbo boring because it's just too easy. There's like a level. Like, let's just say this. They could release High Mythic Plus where it's basically one key level and it stops scaling at 15 or whatever, and then each level above that, it does no longer infinitely scale, and maybe there's no affixes or whatever, and it just reduces in time to like time the key. But like, if let's say it's a 15, let's say it starts at a 16, whatever. All I'm saying is there's a version of that where people love it, and there's a version of that where people hate it. And it purely depends on how difficult it is in general to stay alive and to kill things quickly. Like, there'd be a week or two of innovation, how big can you pull, all kinds of stuff like that for each dungeon. But then, I don't know, it's just going to be a... it would also reduce the length of time. Like, imagine they remove depletion. Imagine they remove the need to even farm a key. You can just zone into a dungeon. If you've completed a 16, you can just zone into a 17, whatever. I think that would also reduce the total amount of time people do Mythic Plus, and it would be more of a sprint at the beginning of the patch rather than something you're constantly doing, which a lot of people would like because it's like less time intensive. But I could tell you right now, I bet a lot of high Mythic Plusers would miss homework keys because you'd just be gaming a lot less. You'd run out of content. Like right now, there's technically infinite content, but you'd like run out of that if they did that. It'd be really interesting how they do this. Some specs would be even more dead now than it is speedrunning a Mythic Plus. Dude, there's no way, guys, there's no way to do it, man. If it's about massive pulls and speedrunning, it's these classes. If it's about pushing high in defensives, it's these classes. If there's stops or no stops, it's these classes. Guys, there's a meta in every game. What is it? Max, nobody would complain about no homework key. You'd be surprised. I remember bringing this up with a call of Mythic Plus players, and I'm like, hey, guys, depletion is no longer a thing. And if you, or I don't know who brought this up. I don't know if it was me, but it was like, okay, you guys are doing Mythic Plus like you would normally do, right? Except every single time you don't have to like do a homework key to get the key you want. You could just do the key you want. And they're like, nah, that'd be boring. You would just like MDI pull the dungeon. Every time you'd wipe, you just reset it and start it again. And then like now it would just be about like doing these crazy pulls with a low success chance. It'd feel like wiping to a raid boss and just pulling again rather than like doing the whole dungeon and figuring it out. And some people were fans of it and some people were like, no, that'd be boring. I would rather have it the way it is. They posted the rest of it. Let's get it. Oh, private auras, defensive creep, and raid difficulty. Lock the fuck in, chat. Lock in. Lock in. Lock the fuck in. Wowhead sat down with Ian Hazzikostas and Morgan Day and discussed some of the overall philosophies and goals regarding private auras, Mythic Plus affixes, raid difficulty gearing, class balance, defensive creep, and much more. Raid. What was the goal of private auras in the War Within? Do you think the macro solution is a good solution for players to work around them? We develop... Let's actually go through the questions. Mythic Emergency is probably one of the hardest raids ever created. Many players felt that the raid was tuned for the race, but never nerfed a reasonable... Oh, banger question. Many guilds reach the max item level to the upgrade system before getting to the final boss, and thus there was no power to be gained to overgear bosses, making farm very difficult. Great question. We talked about affixes. We already looked at all of these. Classes and combat. With the removal of increased melee range, are there any plans to help... Parry question. Good. Raid buffs incentivize class diversity and the feeling of being more powerful. Class balance is an important aspect of the game to many players. What do you look for when deciding how to balance classes and when? Hero talents are one of the premier features. Some stunning visuals. Okay, tier sets. We saw some late expansion changes to healers. Mentioned that being a problem. What's the design goal for this? Healing question. Oh my god. All right, we're going to be locked in for the rest of today, I think. Lock the fuck in. Lock in. All right, so you guys are aware of this. If you have private auras, usually when a mechanic gets hard enough, you are still going to use a weak aura. You're just going to press a macro to make it work, or you're one of the few guilds that figured out a way to not have to press a macro to get private auras to work. And let's see how they plan on addressing that. We developed this new tool in Dragonflight as part of our efforts towards our philosophical goal of wanting to limit the computation power of add-ons and reestablish more room in encounters for players to coordinate and communicate. And allow us to give them more time to react and process mechanics as opposed to unavoidably having to tune around a world where when add-ons can solve a problem for players, we know at heroic and mythic difficulty, players will rely on add-ons to do that. So private auras were this new tool that we developed to put certain buffs and debuffs out of reach of add-ons. Through that tool, and we've been guided by the feedback from the community, we've determined what is good, what it's good at, and what it's not so good at. And I think there are plenty of applications of private auras over the last couple of tiers that were pretty innocuous. They're just debuffs that require an immediate reaction from players that you're handling on your own, or a couple people are running out of the raid with something that people just watch for and handle it accordingly. So just gonna, before I finish this, I mean, okay, so there are examples of private auras being a positive thing. There are. In fact, they made like, I don't know, I think like something like 30 or 40 mechanics private auras in Emergency, and like only 2 of them were a problem. So like, but I would say like 35 of them, I'm just making up numbers here, like most of them had no impact, like whether they're a private aura or not. If anything, it's just annoying because of the debuff placement on your UI. I would say like maybe 2 or 3 of them made the game a little bit better to play, meaning that a mechanic that otherwise would have been used for weak auras was now YOLO'd because it was a private aura. That did exist. That did happen. I think it's nice when that happens, but it's like just whatever, you know? But like when it's bad, it's so bad. Like anytime you have to press a macro to make a weak aura work, it throws away all of the good that is caused by putting private auras on mechanics properly. So, I mean, they said like we've determined what it's good and not so good at. So again, what it's good at is like the P1 intermission fire rack weak aura. Let me give you an example of this. Let's see, liquid fire rack. Okay, so there's a mechanic in this phase. If you didn't know, there's a mechanic. There it is. Okay, so right here. This is a private aura, these mythic soaks. If this wasn't a private aura, what you would see on everyone's screen right now is you would see a left, middle, or right. And then it would just assign you to go to one, and it would have a dynamic assignment list. So like if 3 people in the left group, we made static groups for this, but if 3 people in the left group got picked, then the left is actually going to be short players, and they would need help, right? So if this wasn't a private aura, 100% what would have happened is you would have had a weak aura assign which one to soak here every single time. So this being a private aura did save you from that and did make you YOLO it, which is a positive. That is a good thing. Anytime you can do that, it's a good thing. The problem is it's massively outweighed by having to press a macro to give you the right buff going into the intermission, which again, some people did find a way to make these work without having to press macros, but that's few and far between. So that's the issue. So let's see how they wind this back at the end here. What we've seen though is that when we try to use private auras to apply a raid-wide coordination mechanics where the entire raid needs to solve a problem together, and the rewards effectively for doing so are more significant, players will find cumbersome workarounds involving creating manual macros that they could then communicate that information to add-ons that would solve the problem for them. I wouldn't say it has anything to do with raid-wide coordination. Like, let's say macros existed, or the private auras existed in Jailer. You would have still pressed a macro to do the bombs, but that's not raid-wide coordination. That's like 5 or 6 people. Same thing with the Neltharion bombs. Same thing with... it's just literally everything except for P1 fire rack. It's just any... I would say this is wrong. When we try to use private auras to apply a raid-wide coordination mechanics where the entire raid is a solved problem together, erase that whole line and have it say, when we try to use private auras and people have to press a macro to make a weak aura work, blah, 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 this sucks, right? Players will find cumbersome workarounds that they could then communicate that on. This has nothing to do with group things. It is it can be small. It can even be like when in P2 on Smolderon, the orb went on 4 people and those 4 people had to do it. It's not a group-wide coordination. And in P2 of Fire Rack, you get the shadow and fire things. It's not group-wide coordination. It's like 4 or 5 or 6 people or something. Like that's not what it is. When the advantage of doing it is great enough, people will do it anyways. When a mechanic is difficult enough where the coordination of a weak aura will vastly surpass the coordination of YOLOing it, which is what private auras incentivize you to do, you will go through the very annoying, cumbersome task, as you put it, of using a macro, which everyone hates. When the advantage of doing it is great enough, people do it anyways. In that case, the cure is definitely worse than the disease. Okay, we understand that. So they understand that anytime a private aura makes you press a macro, it is a net negative. This is the first time I've ever seen them say that. That is huge, huge info. There's a reason why we pulled out of the private aura treatment from auras like those from Fire Rack's first intermission, because we understand we're not actually helping here. We're not improving the player experience. So I think we've approached the War Within with a desire to refine our continued use of that tool to steer clear of applying it in areas that we know are going to cause more annoying and frustrating behavior, and continue to use it in areas where we think it can allow for room for player decision-making and creativity that isn't going to be delegated to add-ons automatically. Okay, so they're basically saying we're going to... So yes, we have identified spells so far where it's been good, and we're going to continue using it on that spells, but if it's ever something super important, we're not going to do it. So you're just going to allow us to use weak auras and the stuff where it's really relevant for, or you're going to try to make mechanics not do that? I'll give you a little sneak peek. That new Brood Twister boss, people are going to be using macros and marks for that to make that private aura work. So your first step would be making that thing not a private aura or changing that mechanic. Okay. And let's see what Morgan's response is. But at least this is good. I mean, this is, again, the first time we've ever seen them say, we get it, that when you use a macro on a mechanic, that is worse than what private auras are doing for you as a positive, which is very obvious to us as players. But like with them continuing to push forward with private auras in general, that doesn't seem to be obvious from their side, right? They're giving us a we hear you. Cool. Morgan Day said a lot of what it boils down to is to reclaim some design space. There's a lot of fun mechanics or interesting design elements that would be really hard to do nowadays, and we're reflecting on this. As we discussed, yeah, it is kind of an impossible problem. Like, having to create mechanics that are interesting enough, but also not hard enough where you'd feel like you'd need to have a weak aura for them. It's really hard to find that perfect line of boss that's challenging where you don't need a weak aura and also isn't, like, super easy because they're trying to not go over that line. You know what I'm saying? Razor thin. As we discussed this problem internally a lot, and there are a lot of boss encounters nowadays where you have a lot of swirlies on the ground that you just really need to dodge. And when you take a huge step back and reflect on that, I think you can say a lot of that is because from a design space, that's a design space that add-ons haven't solved. True. You just have to have some amount of personal responsibility where you can dodge that mechanic. That's become more of a baseline. Where we take a step back and look at older bosses, it was almost like an archetype, like a patchwork was an archetype. The dodge lots of swirls used to be an archetype. That's where we start now, and we add layers of interest on top of that. That's something that we're going to continue to use, but refine the usage of it. Philosophically, that's a direction that we want to continue to move in. Yeah, this all kind of definitely points to the, like, weak auras should definitely not work for in-fight raid mechanics, but, like, kind of like everyone agrees with that, though. Like, I think, like, everyone, like, if we lost weak auras in this game for, like, user interface design, that would feel so bad. They would make the game significantly worse, but, like, I'm pretty sure everyone that does any level of rating would tell you that if you didn't have add-ons doing anything on the fight for you, that would just be better. In-fight add-on stuff is bad. If that was all gone and they could just not have to worry about that as a design thing, because, like, when you read this, it sounds like they're just struggling to even find boss mechanics that are interesting that aren't, like, add-on disasters. And I feel like you're limiting what you can do on a raid fight because of that, right? But removing all add-ons would be horrible, so definitely a tough spot. Okay, Mythic Amirdrasil was probably one of the hardest raids ever created in WoW. Many players felt that the raid was tuned for the race world first, but never nerfed to reasonable levels from the majority of the player base. How does the team feel about Mythic Amirdrasil's difficulty and all of the one-shot group mechanics that ended up in the raid? Okay, this is a great question. This needed to get asked. I don't know if this has been asked yet. I think it hasn't been since Amirdrasil, at least. Yeah, I mean, I have, like, quotes from Ian where, like, you know, when they design, like, end bosses that are going to be really, really hard right away, they don't even know how hard to make them because they can't test for what we were able to do. Like, we're way better than any raid team or test team they would come up with to, like, test this for us. They, like, get a general idea, and then they try to just ramp it up to see if it's possible for us to do. Like, an exact quote from Ian is, here, I guess I can find it. Congratulations on your kill and on an incredible performance over the last dozen days. There were times in the last week where we genuinely doubted whether something was even humanly possible, whether we were demanding too much, and you consistently proved us wrong. That was part of, like, the end of the kill thing, right? So, like, they're literally not even sure if it's possible to do some of this shit. It's so hard. Probably referring to the seeds. But, you know, there's been a lot of friction on that in the last couple of things. I don't know how much of it is Race to World First related. I think people are like, oh, well, this is only happening because they have to design bosses for Liquid and Echo. I think that's possible. I mean, they definitely do target us for tuning goals on a specific boss in a specific week, but that's been happening for years, even in the best raids. I think this just happens to be a raid where there were two extremely hard bosses back to back. Also, the upgrade system didn't allow for people to gain more eye level over time, where normally you would have a lot more eye level than us. You actually have the same eye level as us. But this has happened before the Race World First was ever streamed. Do you think they, like, tuned for the Race World First or really gave a fuck about it? Like, back in, they just kind of made the raids the same difficulty every time. Like, Tomb of Sargeras, Fallen Avatar, into KJ was just as much of a burden as Tindral into Fyrak was. Sometimes they just make really, really hard raids. And no one was complaining about the Race World First back then, right? But I am interested to hear what he says here. Ian Hazzikostas said, looking back on Amirdrasil, there were a couple of misses there. We can all agree that the spike in difficulty going from Smolderon to Tindral was too great, and that's true in basically all versions of the raid. I don't agree with that in Heroic. I actually think Heroic Smolderon is significantly harder than Heroic Tindral. But I'm sure the reason he's saying that is because he can see some kind of data on that. I think in Mythic, it's insane. Like, Mythic Smolderon is an absolute fucking worm compared to Tindral. Like, he is a tiny, puny worm boss in comparison to, like, dude, if Tindral was that much harder than Heroic Smolderon, I mean, if anything, it was as hard or maybe, like, a little harder. But dude, like, Mythic Smolderon and Mythic Tindral was, like, fucking insane jump. Let's Let's see, no matter how many nerf passes were taken, the overall mechanical complexity and execution demands meant that for every guild progressing through Mirdasil, no matter when they were doing it, getting a 7th boss down, meaning you were staring at a brick wall. We prefer to have a smoother ramp in difficulty that sets players up, with each boss being something which feels like a manageable step up from the next one. So I wonder if that's because Tindral was too hard, or they're saying that we should have made Larodar, Naimu, and Smolderon harder, so naturally, when you got to a boss like Tindral, you were like a battle-hardened guild that was ready for that fight. Because, like, there is... I would say that probably Tindral was too hard for too long, for sure, but I do think that's part of it. Because Smolderon was so easy, guilds that had no business fighting a second-to-last boss in this game were. Right? Guilds that should never have killed any second-to-last boss were on Tindral in not even that long of a period of time, and it was just like, they're just not compatible. You're not able to do that fight. Where, like, generally speaking in WoW, if you kill a boss, you should be able to say, it might take us a while, but we can kill the next boss. That actually wasn't true for hundreds of guilds on Tindral for weeks until they nerfed it. Like, it would have probably never been possible for them to kill it reasonably before their guild died from people stopped showing up. So that is a good point. Like, they didn't ramp... The difficulty curve in the raid was just not good. Which is also why I keep asking people if they like mid-raid walls. And usually people say yes, but, like, mid-raid walls cause this exact same problem. Where you, like... are, like, generally speaking, your difficulty curve should look something like this, right? You like kill the first boss, and then it gets harder and harder and harder and harder and harder, and you go to the end of the raid, right? But, like, the mid-raid wall does this. The mid-raid wall does like this, and then it's like big spike, and then it's like back down, and then it goes back up. I think this, everyone you ask says mid-raid walls are good, but, like, I feel like this has to cause the same problem Tindral caused this raid, right? Because this is what Tindral was, right? Ready? First couple of bosses... fucking Tindral and Fyrak. That was an insurmountable wall. Mid-raid walls kind of cause the same problem, even though I appreciate all hard bosses. They're fun. Let's see. The other piece of that is the timing of nerfs. The reality is, it's no secret across the Mythic player base, you're looking at the range from the Race to World First competitors to, in quotes, mere Hall of Fame guilds that are getting cutting edge in the middle of the season to those who are squeaking in under the wire at the end of the season. There's an incredible range of coordination and skill, and frankly, in the game, we're trying to deliver a satisfying progression experience to all of those groups. Some amount of nerfing is going to be required to achieve that, and that's something that the WoW team has done with our raids for as long as WoW's existed. You can go back to Black Temple and Illidan, more accessible 17 years ago. Wait, what? You can go back to Black Temple and Illidan, more accessible 17 years ago, period. Was made accessible 7? Okay, all good. Just moving on. I had a stroke. All good. But we probably could have been more aggressive with a couple of them and dropped them a bit sooner. Tindral. The thing we need to be mindful of when we do that, though, is we always want to make sure that we're not undermining guilds' progression experience that are always partway through the fight. We actually were urged by a number of Hall of Fame level guilds going into the end of last year not to take too heavy of a nerf bat to those last couple of encounters because they were enjoying the challenge. They just wanted to make it a bit more consistent, but they didn't want something that was suddenly going to undermine all the effort they were going in as far as getting as far as they had. So all those factors take away from Mirdasil, and we apply that to our raids going forward. Well, they didn't mention this about gearing, but I really feel like gear is so much of this. Like, here's how raids used to be, man, right? Like, world first kill would be like, I don't know, you'd be like 135 eye level, right? And then by the time guilds were getting like late tier cutting edge, they would be like 160 eye level, right? Plus random power source from patch. Right? So, like, that nerfed the raid. This doesn't happen anymore. Because of the upgrade system, like, you know, so then and now. Now it's fucking world first kill 482, late tier cutting edge 488, plus shitty helm enchant. Right? So a lot more nerfs are required for this because... there's not the power. Normally, this to this is a massive power jump. These people are significantly stronger than we were. So that just more nerfs need to happen because of how crazy the upgrade system is for splits and world first guilds. So I don't really know how you solve that. Maybe it's some like ICC scaling buff every week or whatever. But like the reality is, your guild gaining 45 eye levels, which is a made-up number. It's never been that high, but just in the first example, versus your guild gaining 6 eye levels and the raid being nerfed is effectively the same thing. It's just one feels bad and one doesn't. You getting gear on Tuesday, zoning in, and getting the boss lower than you did on Monday because you have more gear feels good. You feel more powerful. Where if you're the same eye level every week and then you just log in one day and the boss is a lot easier, you feel cheated, right? One feels bad, one feels good. They're effectively the same thing. So I don't know how they get us back to here, because the upgrade system is definitely a widely positive thing for the game, but I'm surprised he didn't mention that. I feel like that's such an important part of all of this. Hopefully they answer that later. Oh, here we go. Looks like they asked that question right after this. Morgan Day said, ultimately with Tindril, it kind of reminds me of Tomb, where Fallen Avatar almost felt like an end boss in itself. Yep, good point. I think there were probably some of those really big swings that we took later on. We could have moved up where we might have made those adjustments, like the double soak. The end point of where we got was really good for the broader audience, but timing-wise, we could have looked where that landed. Many guilds reached... Someone said, then apple, now potato. That's not what you should have taken from... I did kind of draw an apple. And that's just a circle. All good, though. Many guilds reached the maximum item level due to the upgrade system before getting to the final boss, and thus there was no power to be gained to overgear bosses, making farm very difficult and on the level of progression outside of nerfs. Are there any plans to adjust this to allow guilds to significantly overgear bosses further in the season? What a fucking excellent question. Wowhead's killing it so far. The item level progression is something that we continue to talk about a ton. It's important that people across all playstyles feel like they have meaningful rewards and forward progress available to their characters. We don't want to string out too much so that it feels like rewards are few and far between early on, but at the same time, I think there needs to be meaningful goals to pursue as long as the season runs for more players. That's something that we're still working through, though I think it's more of a mid to late expansion problem. I think the first season of the new expansion kind of always was a pretty significant gearing curve to it because everyone is going to be starting with pre-raid dungeon gear. Everything is an upgrade. Every epic item you see from every early source is an upgrade. So I think there's a lot more room for guilds to continue to grow. At a very low level, like normal and heroic raid group, I think this is true. But like, I think the beginning of the season, regardless of whether it's season 2, season 3, or season 1, is always the same. Because like, you get a baseline of like what now will be Mythic 0 gear or like low Mythic gear. And you get that within like days to a week of the season coming out. So like, if you're talking about in the span of like 3 weeks, the answer is yes. But like over the course of 3 months, after like a week or two, it just feels like a normal season. So that's an interesting answer. Let's see. Max eye level should not be meaningful progression. BIS pieces should be the meaningful progression. Well, now it's both, right? You still try to acquire BIS pieces, but you also can increase your eye level over time. They can both work. There's a really fantastic forum post a few months ago by a pretty prolific Mythic guild. Their guild leader... Oh, that's shout out Dobby. Their guild leader made this really great forum post. We ended up talking about that post at length, but a major part being the feeling of progression. And like Ian mentioned, ultimately we want items to be the thing that is nerfing the raid over time. But as we discussed, especially when it comes to Mythic raids, there's just multiple audiences. I think I could argue there's probably 3 different audiences that are experiencing the Mythic raid at different times, and when they get to different bosses can depend on the tuning for them to have a greater experience of what that should look like. True. Max, you skipped the second part of Ian's answer. Oh, shit. At the same time, we recognize the raid progression itself is kind of a life and arc its own apart from the rest of the game. We do want to make sure that there are ways for raid groups that are progressing over the course of the season to feel like it's not just Blizzard nerfing the content to bring within reach, but they are gaining power. That's exactly what I just talked about. There are a couple of ideas that we're exploring in that space, one of which we hope to roll out with the first season. Oh, banger. Good thing you told me to go read that. That was very important. We like that. Okay, back to the second paragraph here. Ian alluded to it, but I'll talk a little bit more about it. We're discussing introducing a system that has similar vibes to the re-origination array back in old year, the first raid tier BFA, except we'll be leveraging the quest system. It'll buff players over time. Right now, we're looking at the buff capping out at about 20% increased player power while you're within that raid, and that will apply to your warband. Okay. This is actually what Dratnos keeps suggesting. It's the Siege of Orgrimmar buff. That'll be cool. That's something that if you come in later with your ults, you can have that extra player power across everyone on your account for that content. Depending on how that's received and how well that achieves our goals, we'll be looking to expand that system or try to tie it more closely with our itemization system. So this is huge. So if they can do this right, it will completely solve this problem, the apple and potato part. That will, and not to mention the alt buff is fat. And it'll really help reclears, but it'll also help the really late cutting edge teams too. That just sounds like kind of the best solution to this problem, honestly. Fuck yeah. Great news. So far, everything we've got from this interview today is very good. And then they do a Mythic Plus thing. If you missed this, we actually talked about it earlier. So you can go back and look at that or not. But it's also really good. TLDR here is, yeah, a lot of the problems you guys are mad about is because we've designed like there's no one size fits all solution for Mythic Plus. You know, people want high Mythic Plus to feel a certain way, and people want like doing Mythic Plus for gear and filling out your vault and getting your portals to feel a certain way. In reality, we've only ever tuned it for that second one and not for high Mythic Plus, and we feel like we should actually like have some design goals for doing Mythic Plus above the reward system right now, just in general, which if you do high Mythic Plus should just be a positive thing. All right, moving on. Here we go. Classes and combat. With the removal of increased melee range and War Within, are there any plans to change how bosses can parry melee abilities, especially with the increase of the number of raid bosses that have mechanics that require melee to DPS from the front? Parry is a super outdated mechanic. It shouldn't be in the game anymore. At the very least, what parry should do is it should, like, when you parry, it reduces your damage of the attack instead of makes it not happen. Because what happens right now is very important melee abilities go on cooldown. And they don't happen, like, you know, Colossus Smash and shit like that, and that's like a huge problem. Just parrying in general is just a super outdated, shitty game mechanic. It's not interesting, it's just stressful and annoying, so I think it should just be gone. No, that's something we like to evaluate on a case-by-case basis. There's always those big raid bosses that are standing on the ledge, and cases where it's like, we could very easily disable parry when it makes sense. Ultimately, what is your positioning is something that we feel like is an important core part of WoW combat, and there are cases where it does feel unfair for the player because they're dodging mechanics because the boss is rooted or something, and then we can always reevaluate that, but not looking to change the core fundamentals of how creatures of WoW work. I mean, it's clear they're not working on it at this time. I also don't think this is the absolute biggest deal in the world. Like, I don't think anyone's, like, losing their mind over this. But I would say that parry definitely falls along the lines of, like, super outdated WoW mechanics that have no place in today's game. It's definitely nice in Mythic Plus when nothing is parried. Stuff in Raid parrying just seems giga fucking outdated. It just shouldn't happen. Completely disagree with this. Moving on. Raid buffs incentivize class diversity and the feeling of being more powerful when you are in a group. We've seen more classes get raid buffs in Dragonflight, with Paladin getting a second and Hunter's Mark, leaving just DK and Shaman. I don't think even putting DK and Shaman in the same sentence makes sense. Is there a reason that these classes don't bring anything specific to buff to the raid? Looking to answer this, let's see. Here we go. Ian hazzikostas said, ultimately our goal is broad spec. It does a Mythic Plus. I mean, it does and it doesn't. Like having a raid buff doesn't even matter sometimes in Mythic Plus. Like, sometimes it makes you relevant in Mythic Plus, which is a problem, but, like, I don't know, like, fucking Hunter's Mark in Mythic Plus, totally fucking irrelevant. You never think about it, right? The Monk buff at Mythic Plus, 5% fizz damage, even if, like, you had a bunch of melee, like, a lot of them do a bunch of magic damage. That's like a piss raid buff. Like, some of them are just super, super OP. The reason raid buffs exist is to force class diversity in raid. The fact that it affects dungeon viability is whatever, but, like, that's definitely not the reason you're hoping for a raid buff is for dungeon reasons, you know? Let's see. Ultimately, our goal is to bring broader spec and class representation of different roles. I think we're hesitant to add more raid buffs that might risk feeling redundant and yet another thing to manage, or that might be too heavily force less choice in composition forming. Oh, this is so funny. Okay, ideally, though, if you're a pug leader, if you're putting a raid or mythic raid group, you should want one of every class, and then once you have that covered, you should look at who's available and how you want to fill out the rest of your roster based on the people and the content you're bringing. But you don't. If you're a pug leader, you want one of every class except for a shaman and a DK, depending on if that fight needs grips or not. That's just not true. It doesn't happen. Do you guys know that? Wait, let's read the end. We need to look at diversity and make sure that classes like Shaman and Death Knight are bringing tools to the raid that makes them a valued member of the raid group. DKs do. I know DKs would rather have a nice little aura that puts them in the raid all the time, but DKs just simply are brought to raids all the time. DKs parading around acting like that they have the same problem that fucking Resto and Ellie Shamans have is dumb as fuck. It's just not true. I think it's an issue that DPS DKs don't have mass grip. Why do Blood DKs have that and they don't? Why is Blood DK AMZ better than DPS AMZ? None of that makes sense. But, like, saying that it's like Death Knight and Shaman in the same sentence is actually insane. Like, it's so much worse for Shaman. Okay. Let's see. DKs are bringing tools to the raid that make them valued members or valued in dungeon groups. They're not. Both of those classes, turbo not valuable in dungeon groups, right? So that's not to completely close the door on a new raid buff ever coming to them, but our hope continues to be to use other knobs that the team has at its disposal to get them to a place where they feel equally valuable without just needing a raid buff. This is lunacy. One second. Let me pull up a sheet. I just need to find it. This is so out of touch. He's right about it just being the case in Mythic. Like, I truly don't think it matters in Heroic. Like, you don't need any raid buffs in Heroic, but like in High Mythic Plus, raid buffs are an issue, and in Raid, like he mentioned here, we don't want to force less choice in composition forming. Bro, we're already there. Like we're already at the raid compositions are heavily. I made this spreadsheet a while ago. I'll make it small so it doesn't blind you because I have no way to make it look good with Dark Reader. But here's how many raid buffs were in BFA. Okay, there we go. There was like 12 spots in your raid that you realistically had to choose from. Okay, and then in Shadowlands, you had 11. All right, cool. We can fill out half of our raid group. This is in Mythic, of course, but this is the only time raid buffs matter. And then in this expansion, you added 2 of the new class that are needed, minimum. You added a Hunter raid buff. You added a Druid raid buff. You added a Rogue raid buff, and you added a second Paladin raid buff, right? So, which you need all of these all the time. Do not get that twisted, right? And then one specifically for just enhance. And yeah, you know what it does? It does limit your comps. But it's like, why stop this short? Like, why stop this short? You're already halfway there. There are 2 specs that don't have a raid buff at all. Just change enhance here to just shaman. That's not what it is right now. It's enhance. But change enhance to shaman and we're vibing. There's nothing else that's even the case. Like, it's already fucked because of how many raid buffs are in the game so far. We don't want to heavily force less choice in composition forming. You already did. It's just 2 specs aren't included. It's insane. Like, every shaman player should be mad about that, and they're right. They're not delusional. They're right. Dude, I hate this answer. We need to look at diversity and make sure that classes like Shaman and Death Knight are bringing tools to the raid that makes them valued members of a raid group. Yeah, you said this before. Sorry, what valuable tools do Resto and LA Shamans bring to the raid that makes them valuable members of a raid group? Exactly? That like other classes don't do? Oh, are they super tanky? Oh, they're the weakest defensive class in the game, right? So you sit them because they can't stay alive? Oh, you bring Spirit Link? Oh, for 1 spec? That's sick. You definitely need Spirit Link, by the way. I haven't used one in the Race World First in like 4 years. I don't know. It's just not there. It's just, oh, what a ridiculous answer, man. Like, I get that you don't want to go down the like, oh, there's no composition things, but it's like, you got to do all or nothing, man. You got to like, you can't just, you're already here. You already went this far. You gave Paladins a second raid buff. You don't want to force compositional swaps. You want every class to feel like, they have a reason you'd bring them to a raid. Let's forget the fact that you're ignoring 1 or 2 of them. Why does Paladin have 2? Exactly. While we're forcing limited comp things, why exactly does Paladin have 2 things you absolutely need to have in raid at all times? Why does Aug stack 2 Ebonmites on the same target? So as long as that's ever even close to the same thing, you'll always have 2 of these things. Not to mention, worst case scenario, let's say they remove Aug from the game, you'd still want 1 Evoker, right? What are we even fucking talking about here? You don't want to give Shamans a raid buff because it would give you less choice in composition forming. So what the fuck were you thinking when you added a second Paladin raid buff this expansion? Like, what's the reason? Those 2 things is the same thing, but one of them just completely disregards this and the other one doesn't. You guys need to fucking fix it, man. You have to fix this. This is like you're so close, right? How many people did you hear complaining about raid buffs in BFA? Oh, wait, like almost fucking no one? Maybe because scrolls existed? What about in Shadowlands? Still minorly not talked about. Why do you guys think, like, at least if you're a shaman or a rogue or a hunter or a druid, back then you weren't like, oh man, I don't have a raid buff, but at least like half the classes in the game don't. Oh, wait, what's that? Now every single class in the game does, except for these 2? And some fights don't need a grip, and even then a spec of DK does way better grips, just like a spec of enhance does way better than the other shaman specs. It's just fucking, what a terrible answer, man. I mean, okay, sure. And you know what? I know another thing about this is, as a designer, they think it's lazy, and it is true. Like, as a designer, it's like a lazy thing to just be like, okay, well, we need to give them an hour-long raid buff. Can't we give them something else cool that like just makes people want to have them in a raid? You know? I wouldn't even throw that off the table too. Yes, do that, right? There are classes that are brought here that don't have like a hour-long raid buff they provide, but actually give them one, you know? I don't know. You have one in their kit, right? I mean, I'm totally fucking making this up, but like, I don't know. Don't they have something pretty unique in like the whole mana thing? Like, can't you make this mana spring shit? Like, make mana actually matter in the game and then also give a significant source of mana that you can only bring one of. But then again, isn't that just kind of a raid buff? Like, I don't know. You can be more creative than that. It's just if you think this is true, and you're a WoW Blizzardman designerman, and you think our hope continues to use other knobs the team has at its disposal to get them to a place where they feel equally valuable without just needing a raid buff. Well, you haven't, right? You just can't possibly think that you've done this. Okay, let's move on. Class balance is an important aspect of the game to many players. What do you look for when deciding how to balance classes and when? This is a good question. Okay, we touched on this briefly as we were discussing raids and raid adjustments coming. We actually try to create a pretty consistent cadence for when our combat team looks at class balance and sending hotfixes as a season progresses, and we will continue that philosophy going into War Within. We feel like this was very effective in Dragonflight in terms of what we look for. We often talk about it, not too dissimilar from what Ian was just talking about, different strengths and weaknesses for classes. We will often ask the question, if we can wave a magic wand, what should this look like? Whether we're looking at a specific raid encounter, what should the damage meter look like? What should the healing meter look like? Who should be winning this, and are they? We'll often come up with these high-level philosophies that really guide our tuning in terms of where this should be on this. Is this their strength? Should they be winning here? Yeah, because certain classes are designed to do better on, like, 3-target, 2-target. Like, for example, if Demo was doing more damage on a fight with 6 spread-out targets than Affliction, then, like, clearly something just doesn't make sense, right? But yeah, I mean, so I don't even think it's like, oh, well, we discussed when we're doing hotfixes as the season progresses. You don't even have to wait till things seem out of balance. This game has so much going on. It is probably literally impossible to perfectly tune WoW, right? With just how many different things there are, right? So you know that it's always going to be a work in progress. So just plan on a certain amount of hours of your day, if you're a class designer, when these seasons are out, or hours a week are purely devoted to this because it's constantly needed, super important. That being said, there's multiple points of Dragonflight where it's been as balanced as it's ever been. Season 1 Mythic Plus in Dragonflight, beginning of Season 2 Dragonflight. Raid, the whole expansion, single target, stuff like that, has been like really, really fucking close. Like probably better than any other expansion. Right now, Mythic Plus has been in a horrible spot for a while, primarily due to AUG and Vengeance Demon Hunter. But I mean, Raid has been really balanced the whole time. You could kind of feel it this expansion when they announced and started working on the new expansion. Retail felt a lot less. Bro, there were more balance changes from 10.0 to 10.0.7 than there ever previously were in an entire expansion before the second patch even dropped. That's how much there was going on. It was insane. Like every week there was a ton of shit. And then that happened for a little bit of Season 2, and then it just stopped happening entirely, basically. Because, I don't know, I guess the expansion was coming out, or they felt like the job was mostly done, or I don't know why, but like they did an insane amount of balance at the beginning, and then they moved on. And maybe that's just what we're going to expect with expansions, but who knows. Probably because most of that balance had to do with the class and spec trees, and they felt like they had a better handle on that 6 months in or something. I don't know. Anyways, sure. Balance a lot. Cool. Hero talents are one of the premier features of the War Within, with some of the specs having fairly stunning visuals attached to these new spells and abilities, while others is a bit more subdued. Will we see additional visuals coming to those specs with fewer new animations? Good question. Could we see more hero spec integration in visuals and cosmetics in the War Within, something like tier sets or hero spec weapon transmogs? That's a super interesting idea. I'll talk about the first part. Hero talents are an evergreen addition to WoW. Same way we might revisit some existing class spells. We totally plan to revisit hero talents and add some additional polish. Cool. We actually want to be really careful. One of our anti-goals, as it were, early on was to not create a multiplicative number of specs. We don't want to end up with 108 specs in the game. So we want to be careful not to do too much there to make it feel like I am a Herald of the Light Paladin. I'm not a Rep Paladin. It's something we want to be really careful to avoid. So while adding some awesome new visuals is something that's in the cards, how we leverage that new fantasy is something that's really deliberate and careful as we move forward. Makes sense. We saw some late expansion changes to healers in Dragonflight, and healing has been mentioned as being a problem. What is the design goal of healers in the War Within to further address these issues and to make healing a more fun role in WoW? All right, let's fucking strap the fuck in right now. Ian hazzikostas said, healing continues to be a major topic among the combat team and encounter team. Those are two sides of the coin here. We've taken the opportunity to do something we weren't able to do mid-expansion during Dragonflight and rebalance the overall size of health pools that players were having relative to incoming damage. Their healing tools, their personal percentage-based heals, and so forth in a way that effectively is nerfing healing.
It's always one of the paradoxes of this debate that nerfing healing sounds like a bad thing. It sounds like a thing that should make healers unhappy. But reducing the relative power of healing in this case, as players have done a great job of highlighting, has improved healer gameplay overall because it slows down the pace at which healers are emptying and refilling health bars and allows for more triage and decision making about where healing is going, as opposed to a world where players can top others off with a single GCD or two. This is true. Everything they just said is true. I can already feel like some people are going to be mad because they're like clearly all of us still want more of this. It's clearly still a like the whole defensive creep, healer cooldowns. We're going to get there, right? Just relax. But so far, what they're saying is true. Them making those changes did help combat that. It's still a problem, but it would be significantly worse if they had not have done that. Continuing on. Then the only way to threaten players' lives is by damaging them even faster than that, or creating situations where healers have to react or players have to preemptively use defensive cooldowns in order to survive. That's something we're keeping a very close eye on over the course of raid and dungeon testing. We're also looking at player self-healing and its proliferation across specs and roles. I think the team is in the process of looking at the leech stat and making adjustments to its throughput it delivers, because that's often just the passive self-healing that people are bringing to encounter that make encounter designers have to add unavoidable pulsing damage to offset it. At which point let's take a step back and mutually disarm here and let healers again be in the spotlight. So leech is not the fucking problem, by the way. It's all of the defensives that class has. It's actually the 5 defensives that every class has, and now the hero talents are making them take 10% less damage. And yeah, it's not fucking leech. Leech actually, okay, that being said, leech actually is a lot better than you guys think. Like Leech on Firac, for example, is like a really, really, really fucking good stat because you're like never topped. Like it's definitely good. And I would say just in general, I think that like all tertiaries are like weird. Like the fact that you can take 20% plus reduced damage from AoE attacks by having a fucking tertiary stat is like unbelievably powerful. So I would say that, I mean, I'd be a fan of like tertiaries not really existing, to be honest with you, because I just think it's harder to make the game with them existing. And then it also means that avoidance pieces are like needed. You need them with BOEs, shit like that. I don't know. Okay, whatever. Let's continue on. It's also really fascinating for the team looking at Classic. As Classic continues to play on its different forms and different expansions, and to see a direct contrast, a point of comparison, the pace of healing and how healing played out in different eras of the game, at times it can be easy with a series of incremental changes to arrive at a place that's meaningfully different than when you started, and not necessarily one that you intended to arrive at. But being able to look back in time and how different systems and sets of tuning values interacted can help inform the discussion of how healing should feel today. At the end of the day, we want healers to be responsible for the health and well-being of their parties. Assuming the tank is keeping things under control but not overly stressing in doing so, they should feel powerful in their ability to save and correct the mistakes that their group has made, but also that they're not spinning so many plates at a given time that if they make a single mistake or breathe for a single second, something's going to collapse. That's how it feels right now. That's the space we're continuing to navigate. Testing continues, but healing stats and breakdowns are something the team is looking at every day. Yeah, I mean, so they're saying like when they're looking at Classic, you know what? It's a shame that we don't have, this is going to be a weird sentence, it's a shame that we don't have like Classic Shadowlands or Classic Legion by now. Again, really weird sentence. But what I mean by that is the game is so different than what it was in Kata. The game is so different in Wrath. But dude, Shadowlands in BFA were like they just happened. They were like, one of them was 2 years ago. And the health bars in that expansion look so much closer / perfect to what you are describing you want here. You don't have to be like, oh, remember how the game was in Wrath? Bro, it was 2 years ago. If we could play through it right now, people would be like, man, I prefer healing this expansion. It could, because it's objectively better. Look at some Shadowlands raid bosses, really hard raid bosses. The health frames look totally different. Look at BFA. You see health bars slowly going down. You see the raid health slowly going down and up at around 50 to 60% on super, super hard encounters. And it's like a constant battle of attrition. If that was the case in current WoW, you would be fearing for your life every single second if your whole raid was at 50%. That means the next anything that happens means your whole raid dies, right? Like, that's how different the game has changed healing-wise in 2 years. Just fucking go back to that. That looked way better. Actually, you know, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go to the thing. I'm gonna show it. All right. I always refer back to this Thune video. Okay. Why healing sucks in Dragonflight? Where do you show the POV of Siegecrafter Blackfuse or High Tinker Mechatorque? Is that a different video? Is that someone else making? I think that's a Jack video. I think it's a Jack video.
60k HP. Look at the health. Boom. And then watch how long it takes for them to heal it back up.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I mean, I guess we could use Thune's video as well. Like, look at here.
Back out. And so if you we're a mythic.
Look at our. This is from World First Sludgefish skill. Look at our raid HP.
Remember, it took 3 seconds for an evoker to just for them to heal it back up.
Yeah, I see.
I big zone in a couple seconds.
Look how
Slam, get ready to bob.
look how long it takes to top the raid.
Remember, it
Look at THD Wolf Disco fired up and sang over the last 10 seconds.
And then
Ready?
watch how long it takes
Just watch their health and just picture that was you in a raid right now.
for them to heal it back up.
Yeah, I see.
I big zone in a couple seconds.
Okay, Slam, get ready to bob. Ready to bob.
Remember, it
Look at it. Look at this. There's fucking bro. Currently in Dragonflight, you're like fucking. There are alarms going off in your head. Like at any single moment, I will die.
3 seconds for an evoker to just full heal.
And
the
we're
raid
5
for
healing, by the
50%.
way.
Whereas they're chilling right now.
Okay, you guys are gonna get.
And then so the roar happens, another 50% health hit, and watch how slow it takes them to heal back up.
One stomp here.
And they're going to yeah, they'll come back out. And so if you were a Mythic Plus player,
By the way, this is one of the hardest bosses to heal of all time. It's not like the boss isn't doing any damage, right? And then Automatic Jack does that too. He has a video like this, and you can even see it back in BFA. Here we go.
You would just get
Look at the fucking raid HP in BFA. This is a very hard boss for some guilds, right? High Tinker Mecha Torque. Look at the raid. Look at the fucking HP bars. Ready? Look at this. Look at this. You cast a spell, a little up, a little down, a little up, a little down. Your decision to use a personal was you see your health going low and you're not getting the heals you used to get. So that's when you use a personal. Now it's use personal on timer or else you will definitely die before you have a chance to actually use your peripheral vision to see you need to use it. This is how healing should look. Sludge Fist is how healing should look. We don't have to go back, like you said, to Cataclysm. We don't have to go back to classic Wrath to see how things change. Bro, look at the last expansion. It is a fucking clown car right now compared to what it used to look like. You added a bunch of healing cooldowns with the new class and spec trees. All those healing cooldowns lay on hands your whole raid over and over again. Move the power away from the healer cooldowns. Put it into their base healing toolkit. And reduce the total amount of defensives in the game, which they have just added more, which I'm sure they'll ask that question later, and have health bars look like that again. You can't have health bars look. You can't have health bars look like this with mages having 60% damage reductions. Look at Dorky's clip. All right, let's do it. Oh yeah. Oh, this is bursting. To be fair, you could burstings existed in every expansion, but yeah, this is Resto Druid healing bursting, continuing to ramp. This is health bars now.
Yeah, you are.
Dude, look at the
healing. I give you credit, Dixum. You fucking healed the living shit out of that, dude.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, though, is like we have a clip like this from Shadowlands where I don't know if you guys remember I don't know if you guys remember from Sylvanas in P2, you could get hit by that healing absorb thing, and our whole raid took the gate, like the gate wasn't down, so everyone in our raid got hit with 3 stacks of the healing absorb, and then Nick just like had a Kyrian disc ramp and somehow healed it off and bursted like insane healing. But that's the thing, that was Disc's bit. Disc didn't do any fucking healing outside of that, and they were the only class that could do that, right? But like you made up for it by them being absolutely dog shit outside of those burst windows. And that's what made them interesting. There were healers that were better throughput overall, and there were healers that were really good at bursting. So even in those expansions where that makes sense. So I don't know. Now it's like every healer's a disc priest in a way, right? Every healer, when they pop their cooldown, the whole raid's gonna live until it's over. And that's just fucking boring, man. Like, it's just boring. Many content creators have been talking about a defensive creep in the game, and many hero talents add even more defensive power to classes. Yep, hashtag podcasting every week until they fix this. The delta between players who use defensives effectively and players who don't seem to have gotten very large, leading to a very large delta in damage taken and survivability, sometimes even removing the need for healers altogether. Do you feel the defensive creep is real, and are there any plans to do anything about it before the launch of the expansion? All this is very true. I talk about defensives as it pertains to like the healing problem, because it's a huge issue there, but also this is a good way to phrase it too, because it does affect survivability. I remember looking at Warcraft log death statistics, and we left Aberys thinking that like dev evokers were like the tankiest class in the game, and it's because we were playing with players that were very good at proactively using cooldowns, and also Holy Priest symbol was still like super broken, and it was a really good renewing blaze raid. Like all the hard bosses had insane renewing blaze uses. And then like if you look at death statistics, dev evokers were like one of the highest deaths. And all the like low deaths were all just cheat death classes and tanks, or naturally like very, very tanky classes like demon hunters. And that just shows you the difference, right? Like the average player in this game is not using their cooldowns at like properly. So adding more defensive cooldowns only increases the delta between those two things. Not something that I talk about a lot, but is something that is very true. I even remember this being the case for hunters. Hunters BM had during the last expansion, BM had a higher death rate than MM Hunter in a tier where both of them were okay. And BM is actually has less reasons to stay still, so they can freely move, which means they should die less. And they were actually tankier. They like BM hunters were tankier than MM hunters, but they had a higher death rate. I guess that's partially because BM hunters are idiots or something. But it was also just like some classes, like the easier classes, will die more than others. But yeah. Okay, here we go. Many content creators... Okay, we can talk about this. Here he goes. It is definitely real in some forms. I think objectively Dragonflight and the talent system added the ability to opt into more hybrid utility, more defensives, and self-healing tools for the DPS specs that may be part of hybrid classes in particular. Was it a hybrid issue? So the off-healing stuff definitely was hybrids gained a ton of shit because of their class tree. But I think like kind of a lot of classes that weren't hybrids also just gained hella defensive. It's not a hybrid thing. On one hand, I think there's some cool fantasy there and underscoring utility options that are available to the classes. There's a lot of value in world content and smaller group content, certainly in Delves and War Within, to have those tools, okay, and really being able to manage your own survival. At the same time, I think we're also keenly aware of the pressure that places on encounter design and healing at the very high end, where you need to assume the players are making use of all the tools available to them, and where having a defensive means... and there's a point where if having a defensive means that all encounter designers have is to hit you harder, and assuming you're using the defensive, having a defensive isn't necessarily making your life easier or better as a player. In some ways, it becomes a little bit of a tax. He's exactly right. So I think we're not in a position where we're going to go through and rip out a whole bunch of abilities. That's unfortunate. That really needs to happen. But I think we're looking at what an ongoing disarmament there might look like. That's good. Yeah, that should be a long-term goal for sure. I think healing will be fucked until you do this. I think it's important that all players have some outs to situations, tools that they can use, but they shouldn't have so many that we're assuming that one is always up, and they shouldn't be so potent or so frequently available that they're overshadowing the contributions of a healer keeping you alive in a group setting. Yep, that sucks. I mean, I don't know what I was really expecting from this, because like what they need to do, this is not like what they need to do is right what he said here. So I think we're not going to in a position where we're going to go through and rip out a whole bunch of abilities in the next coming weeks. This is what they need to do. It's going to be fucked until they do this. So until they do that, going to be bad. I wasn't expecting them to say they were going to do this because I think it's kind of obvious from the changes they made that they're not. At least they know it's a problem and they're looking to do it in the future. I guess there's some positive from that. First season might just be cooked. Morgan Day. Another area where we're looking at here where I actually think there's a bit of an outsized impact is actually augmentation and Mythic Plus in particular. Facts. We look at a lot of the representation in raids and their damage contributions, and it's significant, but it doesn't feel outsized compared to the survivability benefits of what they bring. Especially in smaller group sizes, it's really significant to the point where it might take something that could otherwise be unmanageable by a group. Even a group that is using their defensive really effectively couldn't do that, but with that extra bump from AUG, maybe they can. So that's another area where the team has been looking pretty closely at that, and that's a space we look to make some adjustments. I mean, I don't even think this matters anymore. Like, when they answered this Mythic Plus question earlier, they basically said they're redesigning High Mythic Plus for 4 High Mythic Plusers for the first time ever. And the only reason that you want augmentation in a High Mythic Plus group is because you're not worried about timing the key, you're worried about staying alive, right? But if they just change High Mythic Plus from infinite scaling thing that they've never designed for infinite scaling to something else, it may just make AUG not relevant anyway. So I don't know if there's much reason to do that if you succeed in the thing you wanted to do before. All right, let's see here. A mid-expansion release of a new spec was certainly a first for WoW with the introduction of AUG and its support playstyle. From a design perspective, how successful is the addition of AUG into the WoW landscape? Ooh, let's see. I think overall we remain happy with the experiment of trying to reintroduce a very support-style damage dealer in the vein of what Shadowpriester Enhancement or RET were in WoW 15 years ago, where a huge portion of your contribution was amping the capabilities of people around you as opposed to doing the damage directly yourself. Yeah, It's also just a different time in gaming, though. Like, I think something like this could work back then, but would be like, dude, if they introduced AUG back in fucking any time back then, it would be great. And I still think right now it's great for a lot of people, but obviously it's like for people who play the game a lot, you're not gonna like that. Let's see. It was just amping the capabilities of people around you as opposed to doing the damage directly yourself. I think it's no secret. We've said it on multiple occasions. Obviously, we came out more than a bit too strong in terms of overall tuning there. I mean, yeah, they nerfed the fuck out of it. We have, I think, reined in AUG a couple times, and our goal is for them to see representation comparable to other damage dealers. That's just not true, in raiding at least. In Mythic Plus, again, they could just redesign High Mythic Plus like they look like they're going to, and AUG will just not be good. But in raid, you need 2 AUG Evokers, and until something drastically changes with that class, it will never be even close to being challenged for that raid spot. I mean, like if you're looking at the damage your raid group brings right now, right? Let's just say there's like a bunch of these classes. This is how much damage everyone's doing, right? Yeah. And like, here's the best damage in the game on a raid boss. All right. Your first 2 AUG Evokers you bring to your raid, if done optimally, meaning buffing the correct people at the correct times, playing 100% optimally, your first 2 AUG Evokers you bring to your raid are giving you like this much damage. They're like, that's actually too big of a bar. They're like 20-30% better than the best DPS in the game, something like that. Like it's not even fucking close. So the whole like we think we've reined it in. You said earlier you feel like you're limiting comps, right? Well, that's weird that you can't give someone a raid buff when 2 classes have 2 raid buffs for some reason. And if you think that you bringing a second AUG to your raid is just as important as any of these raid buffs because it's that much better than the top DPS because it caps at 2. So that's not really true. All good. We're definitely keeping an eye on AUG representation in dungeon groups, as Morgan alluded to, and the defensive tools they can bring. If you get to the point where the very, very high end of keys where they're making a difference between just a binary pass-fail check if you can do it versus you will die if you don't have an AUG, that's not ideal, and that's a problem. Well, what's also a problem is that multiple key levels before you're actually struggling to time the key, you're not even struggling to time the key. You can even wipe and still time it. The only thing that you care about is living, so therefore bringing the most defensive classes possible is what you do. But that stinks, right? Like, clearly dungeons shouldn't scale the way they're scaling right now. They should scale, the mob health should scale more than the damage they do to you. So it is ideally a similar difficulty to stay alive as it is to time the key, and that keeps scaling together rather than scaling not at the same level at all like they do right now. That's why AUG is so good. But again, maybe none of this matters because it looks like they're changing High Mythic Plus. Can just ignore that for now until we know what that looks like. But broadly speaking, it's a fun play style that a lot of people have embraced. This is true. As much as if you guys are in the Twitch or Twitter universe, you may be under the impression that everyone hates AUG. That is absolutely false. I think it is still broadly popular within the overall WoW player base for sure. It is just specifically extremely unpopular in the high-level player sphere / Twitch and Twitter influencer WoW people. And I think we want to make sure that we continue to preserve that while not having too rigid a comp situation in content like dungeons in particular. Did they ask him? Yeah, but then you could... I wonder, did they ask about how raid buffs affect dungeons? I know we had a raid buff conversation, but did they specifically mention... They mentioned it in raid, and I don't think they really touched it in dungeons. But, okay. Continuing on. How much longer do we have in here? Visual clarity, collections. We can probably skip that part. Here we go. How do you feel the reduced range for Evoker has played out in practice? I'll give my answer to this before Morgan Day gives it. I think it is a gimmick that didn't work out and you should move back on it. I know I know that Evokers have increased mobility because the lower range exists, but it's fine. Dial that back and give them full range, especially for healers. I can give you a prime example. We actually wanted to play Preservation Evoker in this raid, like for the whole raid, but we thought it was competitively not viable for the last boss because of its ranged issues. And I think we were right. I think we would have played one in progression if it wasn't for the ranged issues. And I feel like that's an insane thing to say. Like, that just shouldn't ever be true. I think specifically for healers, this can't be the case, but I don't know. I just think it was an experiment that didn't work. Let's hear what they say. Yeah, this is something that comes up on occasion. I know the team recently was discussing this as it was a hot button topic, and ultimately, this gets back to what we were discussing about creating unique strengths and weaknesses, especially as it continues to expand. New classes in WoW, sometimes you have to carve out new design space in areas where you can have fun gameplay, and ultimately we're pretty happy with where this landed. I always like to point out to the team that if a reduced range feels like a significant detriment to a class, then let's make sure that the strengths counterbalance that. Okay. Let's make sure that when there's an area that we're a little bit clumped up on a fight, they'll really shine in those circumstances. Yeah, but like, how do you tune around that? Like, if you make Prez the best healer when you're within 30 yards of each other, then they're just going to always be the best class on like most fights, but then some fights they're unplayable. Is that the right balance? Like, isn't that just like too much to think about? I don't know. Like, that seems like a huge problem to me. Let's see. And then also making sure that we add hero talents, and as we expand other class utility, and evokers feel like they're highly mobile class, and they're not falling behind in that aspect either. So it's definitely something that we think we've created some fun gameplay and really unique design spaces for the team to chase. I mean, dude, maybe you can do this and keep trying it. I'm just telling you that like 1 or 2 fights every single tier, it is not competitively viable to use a healer evoker at least. At this level. Not always. Sometimes there's raids where it's not a thing. Sometimes they're so powerful you work around it. I think, because I have to think about this a lot, I just think it's bad. They're gonna keep cooking with it. Oh, here we go. Some specs seem to still be reeling from the AoE cap tuning in BFA, especially on large pulls. Are there any plans to look at AoE caps of all the specs again? No current plans. Okay, we can skip the rest of this, I think. We're continuing to tune specs. No. We're continuing to tune specs against each other, representation against each other, understand the dungeons in particular are in the high end, and pull sizes trend towards the upper end of the spectrum. That can cause balance issues. If loosening or recalculating how AoE works, caps work for specific specs, ends up being the right way to address some of those imbalances, that's a decision the team's going to make. But I think from a philosophical, top-down perspective, the way we're looking at it from our positions, we're not looking to overhaul the way that works across all of WoW. It's more of a surgical spec by spec basis, ensuring that's correct. Ensuring that there are different damage profiles from single target to cleave to sustain to burst AoE to sustained AoE. The different specs have strengths and weaknesses, and that no one so far is outshining the others that it feels like it's the only solution to a given problem players may face. There's been historical examples of classes outshining others. There's been, like, pretty much anytime there's mass AoE, there's like really 3 classes you go to. If it's spread out mass AoE, it's Moonkins. If it's like stacked mass AoE right now, it's Shadow Priest. Over the course of WoW, there's always been like mages, like classes that do damage to a few things, but then like dots spread to multiple other things. Like, I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I do think it is cool in WoW though, like that there are classes that do better 5 target damage than someone else, and someone else can do uncapped AoE, or at least the theory that some classes are really good 2 target stacked, some people are good 2 target cleave. With 39 specs, I think it's good that people are good at those different kind of things. Like, if truly every class was just the damage meter was the same for single, split, 2 target, 3 target, funnel, 4 target, 5 target, 8 target, 20 targets, and everyone just like mass presses their AoE button and they just mass AoE everything. Like, I definitely think that game would be a lot more boring than what WoW is. It's certainly not perfect the way it is, but I think the issue is they never actually tuned that properly to make that feel good. Like, for example, if there was a class that didn't mass AoE, and their AoE was capped at 5 targets, what should be the case is that they windmill dunk any mass AoE class on 5 targets. I actually think if they could come up with some system like that, that would be good. But that's not true. Classes that mass AoE do the same AoE that you do on 5 to 8 targets, they can just also do it to 20. So people haven't learned to trust you on that because it just hasn't really been true. So it's a good idea. I just don't think it's been executed well. But also, it's just like, I feel like if you're going to try to make classes feel different with 39 specs, like high 20s of them are DPS specs, you're going to run into a lot of situations where it's kind of not balanced, unless you want to turbo homogenize it. And I definitely think the game is better for not being homogenized like some other MMOs have. Like, classes feel different, right? I don't know. I think they're honestly stuck between a rock and a hard place here. I would just say that until they figure out how to actually execute that vision, just everyone should be able to mass AoE. That's my only thing. Like, the fact that almost every class can do like decent AoE with 5 to 8 targets, but some just don't have an AoE cap. That just should be, I just think that 8 cap should be removed. Why? Like, just bring back soft caps at 20 again, like there used to be, until you can get that right. Okay, visual clarity. Regarding visual clarity, are there any plans to create an improved swirly graphic that still signifies get out but has a clear border that doesn't expand with the size of the swirly? And then they said yes, absolutely. We can probably skip the rest of this. But that making mechanics visual clarity better is good. I think that the game having like unique theme-based mechanics is better. Like I know some like pure gamers are like the game should look like WildStar, right? Like it shouldn't even be the same color as the boss's element. Like it's a fire boss, it doesn't matter. The animation should be blue so it's easier to see, and everything should be like a fucking targeting reticle on the ground, right? I think that's dog shit. Like I think that would make the game look 10 times worse. And I'm someone who's usually more like lending to that kind of thinking, but I still think that would look like shit. I like that things look like the boss is actually casting these spells. But I do agree that there are a few times where you're not super sure where the edge of a mechanic is, and I think that could always be cleaned up, which is basically what they're asking for here. I'm going to skip the rest of this because I imagine he just says that. There we go. Visual distinctions between friendly AoE effects and boss AoE effects seem to overlap often. Is there a way that you're planning to make them more distinctive? I'm not going to read this. Is there any plan to add visual filters, allowing you to turn off friendly spells that are just visual clutter? Yes, we're definitely still doing a pass on some of these. Okay, the answer is yes, good. This expansion had a lot of large bosses, and players used dust to turn boss translucent in order to see mechanics under the wing/behind the boss. This was disabled later in the expansion. Why was this done? You know, that's a very specific example. Dust was something that would affect other players, not just yourself, and we really want to make sure that you are not impacting other people's experience. So we want to give players the tools for them to kind of create the best gameplay experience for themselves without negatively impacting others. We have actually added some pretty cool new options in the War Within. There will be an option to add a highlight if your character is behind some collision in game. So if your character is very obscured behind a wall, there will actually be an option to highlight your character. As some new UI options to affect your camera will change position. So sometimes maybe if you're fighting a tree boss, you can have a little bit more of your control of your camera. So I'm just going to stop this right here. So I do get that, but the problem is that you didn't give the option for dust to still exist, but then just work for you individually rather than work for everyone, because people needed it. So seeing yourself behind a border under the boss wing is good. But the thing is you know where you are. What you don't see is the mechanic under the boss that is obstructed by the boss's wing, which is why those things were liked, right? So I think this is not the biggest problem in the world, to be honest with you, but this could be changed with boss design as well as other things. But for specifically like Razageth, yeah, I don't know. Could be made a little bit better. All good. Visuals get better. Cool. All right, collections. With how many unobtainable collectibles are coming back, could we ever see elite transmogs have some way of acquiring them again, even if it's a low drop chance? I don't care about the answer to this question. All right, that's cool. That was a nice little interview.